Hey guys, Ike here from IkesOutdoors.com. I'm here today to show you how I made my own vibratory wet tumbler to tumble my brass. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I use this thing and what I use it for first, and then I'm going to show you, I'll kind of deconstruct it and show you how I built this thing. There are some other videos out there on how to build these, but they're not wet tumbles, they're dry tumbles. They use dry media, and I didn't like that. When we put this on the table over here and I show you close-ups on this, you're going to see this, what I used was this walnut media, which is actually a cat litter, which is what I tried to use, and this stuff got everywhere, and I mean everywhere. I've got it all over my floor and all over my bench top here, and I mean I've just got it all over the place. So the shells came out dirty, and they came out with that media inside of them and things like that, and I just didn't like it. So I decided to go ahead and do the same thing, but to use a cleaning solution to clean my brass. So that's what I ended up doing. So I'm going to talk to you about what I'm doing, and then we'll break this thing down and show you how to build this thing. So what I'm doing is I'm using this thing to clean my to clean my reloaded brass. What I'm using is I'm using a mixture of hot water. Basically, I'm using I mix this up one at a time and then just use it as I go. I tried it with cold water. I just mixed this up and used it when it was hot, and then I had some left over, so I used it when it was cold. Didn't seem to make a difference. So I mix up a batch of this nice and hot so that it will dissolve everything, and then if it cools off, I just continue to use it until I run out. So one of the first things that I use is citric acid, and a little bit of this stuff is better than too much. If you get too much of this stuff, what you're going to end up doing is having tarnished cases, and I'm going to have to run and grab the soap that I use. But basically, I use about a half of a regular just kitchen spoon, and I'll show you the spoon that I use. About a half of one is about all I'm putting in there, and my brass is coming out really nice and really shiny. So let me go grab the soap that I'm using real quick. Okay, so before I show you that soap real quick, I'm going to show you the citric acid is what I'm using. A lot of guys will use Lemmy Shine, and Lemmy Shine, I guess it's great, but Lemmy Shine is citric acid with a little bit of lemon scent on it. That's all it is. Lemmy Shine's 16 bucks, and this was 5 something. I got this in the canning section at Walmart, and this big. I've done a lot of brass so far. I would say a lot of brass. I've done 2 or 3 of these worth, so I've done 600-700 rounds of brass that I'm using, and I've only used a couple teaspoons of this stuff. So it's really easy to use, and it is cheap. It's way better and way cheaper than the Lemmy Shine. So it's citric acid made by Ball, and you can get this in the canning section at your local Walmart for about $5. This is the spoon I'm using. Like I said, just a regular kitchen spoon. One of the small ones, was kind you eat cereal with. And I use about half one of these. I don't fill it up. I just a little bit of that stuff, and it works out great. The other thing that I'm using is dish soap from Dollar Tree. This is $1 for this whole big old thing. I use this stuff, I keep it down here for degreasing parts, and I keep it down here for getting grease and stuff off my hands. And a lot of people will say you need Dawn, but they say Dawn works better. I use a couple teaspoons of this, and it's working just fine for me. And you'll see the grease that's coming off of these rounds and how black this water gets. It's working just fine for me. It's $1 at Dollar Tree. You can use Dawn if you want to. It's $2 or $3 for maybe the same size of this. So this is just a cheap fresh apple dish soap scent, or fresh apple scent dish soap that I bought at Dollar Tree. So again, that recipe is for I put about 2 quarts of water in here, which this is a 2-quart container. Before I put the water in there, I put a half a teaspoon or half of a kitchen spoon full of citric acid, and I put about 2 of those same spoonfuls of dish soap in there. Then I put about a quart of water in here, and I shake it up real good, get everything mixed up and get everything dissolved. At that point, I use really hot water. I want the hottest water I can get to get everything broke down, and then I go ahead and fill it up to 2 quarts. At that point, I'll put my brass in my tumbler, and I will go ahead and use whatever water it takes to cover that brass. The remainder I'll leave, and if it gets cold, it gets cold. It works just fine in that process. So I want to talk about one other thing A lot of these wet tumblers that you're seeing people use, they're using stainless steel pins in there. I wanted to try it without the stainless steel pins. I'm trying to keep this as cheap as possible. And I went out and, I put this thing together and I used it without the stainless steel pins, and my brass is coming out fantastic. You'll see some of the brass that I've been loading up, or you'll see it after we get done. But here's the brass that I've been cleaning. I don't know if you can see how good that is. But it is a nice, clean brass, no spots on there. I mean, it's not like something you're going to see a lot of these guys shoot. But I don't care how my brass looks. I want it clean. That's all I care about. If the brass is shiny, fantastic. If it's not, I don't care. I just want it to shoot. And I don't want it to gunk up my gun. That's the two biggest things. So what I was doing before was I was making that exact same solution and putting it in this and just standing down here and doing this for about 15 minutes and cleaning all my brass up and then dumping it out into this strainer, cleaning all that solution off of there, and then going and loading it up, and it worked fantastic. So this is just a better way of getting it a little bit shinier and a little bit cleaner. So with that said, that's my solution, and no, I'm not using any stainless steel pins, and my brass is coming out great. Let's get into how to build this thing. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need is a base. This is just a piece of 1/2-inch plywood, and what I ended up doing was just putting 4 holes in there with some short screws. You don't want these screws to be too long, and these screws go up into your spring. That is your base. What this does is you can then take your wet vibratory tumbler, your vibratory wet tumbler, and place it on those, and that is your base. That's all that is. I made this removable. A lot of the guys that I've seen build these things for the dry version did not make them removable. I took it removable because I'm doing the wet version. I want to be able to take this and dump it out. So that's why I ended up making it removable. So that's the base. The top part of this is just a container that I bought at Dollar Tree. You can buy them at Walmart, Dollar Tree, whatever. And what I ended up doing was taking a wooden base on the fan and securing it to the fan with some bolts, which we'll show you in a minute. And I secured this to this with 3 wood screws that were nice short wood screws. You don't want them to be too long. You don't want them to poke through the wood base below, which we'll show you the wood base in a second. And I use these rubber grommets here. These rubber pieces are the same thing that you find on the bottom of things. You know, like I got one on the bottom of my gun vise up here to keep it from sliding around on a workbench. So that's what those are. The screws go right down in them, so you can attach them as feet. Found those at Lowe's. They were very, very cheap. Screw those down to that base, and that made this thing waterproof. So let's talk about the guts of this thing. This is what really makes this thing work and what really makes it vibrate. This is a computer fan. This is a 24-volt computer fan, and that's important because the 24 volt seemed to be the most powerful, and it seemed to be the one that did the best because it was moving so fast. If you don't have a 24 volt plug-in, it will not turn it as fast. You need a 24 volt plug-in. I had one floating around here. You can see all the walnut media on my desk now, on my workbench here. This is why I didn't go with the walnut media. So you'll read on here, and I'm going to have to get it in the light where I can see it. You'll read on here where it'll say 120 volt, and then it'll say, trying to find where it is. It's 8 to 20 volts, 400 milliamps. So this is an 8 to 20 volt plug-in, and that's what you need, is you need that kind of range. Your little charger plug-ins for like your cell phone and stuff like that are not enough. This is actually an old plug-in off of one of my old Black & Decker weed eater that I had. So it takes quite a substantial plug-in to get this thing moving. Next thing I did was I took my base, which is my piece of wood here, drilled the holes in it to line it up with the fan, ran some bolts through there that were about 2 inches too long, maybe about an inch and a quarter too long. So I had an inch and a quarter extruding out of the bottom. And the reason that I did that is so I could put these springs on here. And what I did with these springs, the part that extrudes out, you don't want to put too much on it. You can see there's only about a quarter of an inch, maybe a half inch in there. The rest of this is able to move, and that's how your vibratory wet tumbler works. It's how it moves. This is lined with that rubber tire. What I did was took a bike tire, cut little pieces of rubber off of it, and rolled it up and put it inside there. You can see a piece sticking out right there, and then just screw that thing on there and it'll go in there, and that rubber will be a shock absorber, and it will also make it to where it'll grip tight. These springs came out of this assortment right here that came from Harbor Freight. These are just an extension spring. I'm not even sure which one they are, but they're an extension spring. They're this one right here that's on the cover. This is about $4. So that will provide you with the springiness when you put it on the face. But the important thing about this fan is if you just turn this fan on, that fan's just going to run circle and it's just going to sit there and it's not going to do nothing. You have to make this fan, you have to get it out of balance. And you can see there's a hole right here where I tried it and it did not work. So what I ended up doing was trying a bunch of different bolts and a couple different locations. And this is what I found that worked best for me. This is about a 3/8 inch bolt. It's a pretty small one. Actually, it might not even be that big. It may be a 1/4 20. But I put it about in the middle of the fan blade, just drilled a hole in there, run the thing through, and put a nut on the back of it. So it put this fan out of balance. So now this fan wants to sit there and shake around. So when you put it on these springs, lined with that rubber, this thing will sit there and shake around. Really, really good job. Really easy to make it vibrate like that, and really provides a lot of action for this thing. So to line this, or to work this thing, I went ahead and put it on a switch. I was going to mount this switch, but I again wanted to be able to take it and lift it off and empty it, so I have not mounted this switch yet. But what you're going to find, this is a 2-cord. Your red and black is what you're going to need. And if you take your 24-volt plug-in and strip it back, wire the two together and see if it comes on. If it does not come on, switch your wires around. Whatever one you had wired to your red, switch it to your black, and that will eventually get this thing to come on. So if you have it wired up one way and it's not coming on, flip it around and that will eventually get the thing to turn on. What I did then was I went ahead and soldered them to this switch, so I have a nice switch to turn this thing on and off, and that ended up being, not, like I said, I may end up mounting this thing. I left myself enough that I could, but I like to be able to dump it. So as of right now, it's just floating around and it's kind of inconvenient. So I'll probably end up eventually mounting this thing up. So let's show you how this thing works. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. Go ahead and mount this to your base with those springs right in there, and you'll see how that thing sets. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this thing. I'll put some brass in there, but I'm going to go ahead and run it without any water in it, just so you can see how this thing, how much this thing moves around. And this is loud, I will say that. This thing's not quiet. So there's some dirty brass that's been primed and resized and is ready to be washed. So you can see that brass moves around quite a bit. Of course, we don't have it completely full, but we're going to fill this thing up. We're going to put our water solution in there. We're going to put the lid on it, and we're going to let it run for about an hour and a half, and then we're going to come back and we're going to look at it. So let's go ahead and fill this thing up. I got about 85 to 90 in there. You can put about 200 rounds in this thing, and if you get too high, it'll want to pop the water off. That's why you want a good lid on there, and surprisingly this lid actually does a pretty good job. So we're going to go ahead and fill this thing up now, and we'll go ahead and get this brass started. So you can see that's cold water. I'm probably going to go ahead and make a little bit more up just so I can cover this brass. I want about a 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch on top of this brass, but this cold water is not going to affect this thing at all. I'm going to run real quick and make up a solution with my citric acid and my soap, and I'll be right back. Just for the fun of it, I figured I'd go ahead and show you guys how I'm doing this, and just so I can explain it a little bit better. So this is a 2-quart container. I'm taking my citric acid before I put any water in there, and I'm taking about a 1/2 spoonful out of that. I don't want a heaping spoonful. I'll show you when I get it out of here. That's about all the citric acid that I'm putting in there. This is better if you use less than if you use more. So if you use more, you're going to get spots, you're going to get tarnishing, you're going to get, your brass is not going to look that good. So about a 1/2 teaspoon of that, or 1/2 tablespoon, or whatever this thing is, of that. And then this cheap apple scented apple scented dish soap. I'm putting 2 of those in there. Maybe this will double as an attractant. If my ammo smells like apples, maybe the deer will come to my tree stand thinking that I have apples. So this might work twofold in being an attractant as well as a brass cleaner. So I'm going to go put 2 quarts of hot water in here. I'm going to fill it up about halfway, mix everything in, get all that citric acid and that dish soap mixed up together, and then I'll go ahead and fill it all the way up the rest of the way with hot water, and I'll use this solution for the next 300 or 400 rounds that I end up cleaning. Okay, so we're just going to top this off here. And I want you to notice how clean that water looks now, because when we come back, that water is not going to look that way. I'm going to go ahead and run this thing without the lid on it so you can see how much it vibrates around, and then we'll put the lid on it and let it go ahead and run for an hour, hour and a half or so. That's why you want something with a lid on it. It's definitely going to move that stuff around. So let's go ahead and put the lid on here. Let's go give it an hour, hour and a half, and we'll come back and check on it. Okay, so it's been about an hour and a half, and you can see all that gunk that's in that water that was nice and clear. All that is just stuff that came off of those cases. And those cases are nice and clean. I might turn this light on over here, see if that shows them a little bit better. Nah, it's a little too bright. But you can see those cases are nice and clean and got a nice polish to them. They're not perfect. Like I said, I am not the kind of person who cares about them being a little bit of dirty and having a little bit of spotting and things like that on them. I just want them to be clean so I can load them, get a good powder burn, and that is about all I care about. So pretty simple, pretty easy process. Now I'm just going to lay them out on a towel, put this fan on them, and let them set overnight, and in the morning I'll prime them and I'll load them up. Okay, so you can see there how easy this thing is to build. It doesn't take any special engineering skills. It doesn't take any special talent with tools. It's really, really simple to build. It's super easy to build, and the components on it are pretty cheap. Like I said, I got the fan for nothing. The plug-in I had laying around, I had to buy the spring kit I bought from Harbor Freight for like $5. The wood I had laying around, the other hardware, the only thing I had to buy was I bought the plastic thing from the Dollar Tree for $1. The little rubber legs in there that I used to kind of seal this thing up, those were really cheap as well. Bought those at Lowe's. Switch was $3 or $4 at Lowe's. Soldered it on there. So I mean, total altogether, the bicycle to inner tube was I think on sale for $4, and you can make a ton of these things with that inner tube. So super easy little project to put together, and it does a fantastic job. I like to do the DIY stuff. If you're the kind of guy who wants to go out and spend money, that's fantastic. If you're the kind of guy that wants to save some money, this is the way to go. I'm the kind of guy that wants to save some money, and I want projects. I like building stuff, so this is a fun, cool way of saving some money and building stuff yourself. I take a lot of pride in building even little goofy stuff like this because it works, and it works fantastic. And when people look at it and I say, hey, I built my own, vibratory wet tumbler to tumble my brass, I take some pride in that. So I think it's cool to do DIY projects, and it's a lot of fun to do. So if you have any questions about this, hit us up in the comment section below. And as I said in the last video, I'll put a link there to the Patreon account. We do have a Patreon account. You do not have to donate to Patreon at any point to watch our videos or to email me or get in touch with me. Everything that we've done for the last 10 years has been free, and everything that we will do for the next 10 years will be free. All Patreon is to help fund some of these DIY projects that we're doing and some of the reviews that we're doing and things like that. And the only benefit that I can really give you from Patreon is you will have some say in what we review and what DIY projects that we do, kind of how we spend that money. And that money does not go toward anything other than the funding of this channel. I don't put that money toward paying my electric bill or anything like that. It's just to fund this channel and keep this channel going. So if you want to do that, great. If you don't want to do that, that's great as well. We still appreciate you watching and still appreciate your support on this channel. And as always, appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you next time.